the majority of the tickets are for these rolling through the red lights. Everyone says, oh, well, there's danger in doing that. Why don't the towns just say no right turns on red light, period?
And this bill that's coming through the Senate, in the Illinois Senate, is that if you make a complete stop but do not go beyond into the intersection itself, you will not be you cannot be fined, which I think was one of the very, very few but minor things that are actually positive about this bill. But I think you're right. I think it would be much more honest if they said, hey, these are revenue cameras as opposed to red light cameras. Yellow light timing has a lot to do with what's going on with these intersections. And Chicago, for example, has there's a federal standard that basically gives a range of yellow light times from 3 to 6 seconds. And at least in the city of Chicago, they set most of their yellow lights at 3 seconds. Now, the good thing about the suburbs is that they actually have 4 to 4.5 seconds. Normally, that second to second and a half allow the driver a little bit more decision time on whether, hey, am I going to stop or am I going to speed up a little to make it, or what do I have to do to make sure that I get through that intersection safely. Now, I'm not sure if anybody knows this, but most accidents that occur at intersections, 44% of them are as a result of a DUI driver or an impaired driver from drugs. Okay, so 44%. The second most incidents that come from intersection collisions is first responders, meaning ambulances, police, fire department. That's about 24%. 23% of the times you have an accident, a collision in an intersection comes from a distracted driver or road rage or something like that, okay? And those normally actually occur 1 to 2 seconds after the red light is turned. However, most of the infractions where they're making money is usually like tenths of a second over the through the red light. So where the amount of safety that's actually the amount of potential for an accident is negligible. So, and getting back to your point about the right turn on red, it's like, to me, yes, technically it's illegal, but it's as illegal as going 56 miles an hour or 57 miles an hour in a 55 zone.
One other interesting aspect is basically the idea of who's judging these violations. And what we've come up with is villages and police departments who are setting up their own judicial systems, which is kind of scary. There aren't that many people who protest the red light camera violations in Westmont. And there have been like 2 or 3 people who have had it dismissed. But the problem is the hearing officer is hired by either the village or the police department. So where's the impartiality? And basically, as Mike said, who is really following up to say, well, what else could be done? All they're doing is taking the money, putting in the general revenue fund, everybody's happy. Nobody's investigating, well, what can be done down at that intersection at Cass and Naperville to actually make it better?
I avoid camera-controlled red lights completely. I detour, I might go a little bit longer around, but I do everything I can to just not go through.
If you avoid some area because of a red light camera, you ought to figure out some way to tell the merchants in that area that that's why you're avoiding it. Because if you and enough people do that, we were talking earlier off camera about what happened in Bolingbrook, where merchants got together because of complaints from customers and had the single red light camera in that community taken out. In Schaumburg, in a very short period of time, at a stoplight around Woodfield Mall, the village of Schaumburg generated more than $1 million in a little over a month. $1 million in fines. And then the camera was gone because they had so many complaints, not just from residents, not just from motorists, but from citizens. And I think when you begin to take all of these things together, as you look at these questions of what's happening locally, whether or not you're going to a municipality. Bob's point about in Westmont, 6 accidents before, 6 accidents afterwards. Some of the work that's been done by others to look at the number of accidents around the city of Chicago. Somebody pointed out to me the Washington Post did a story about after 5 years of the camera system, they found out that the number of accidents at intersections actually went up. And if any of you have ever driven in Washington, D.C., you can understand why. The fact of the matter is these things don't do what they're promised that they will. That's the case that people have to make. In every single community where these cameras are put in, we're told that they are for the safety and security of the citizenry and the motorists and the pedestrians. And we're told always that they work. I was just looking at this article from a few years ago where the police chief in Washington, D.C., in this study that I mentioned, kept saying, "Oh, they've been great. We've issued all these citations and we've really fixed things." And the Washington Post did a survey and found that the number of accidents at corners had actually increased. And he said, "Yeah, but we've issued all these citations." Here'd be a simple idea that if each and every one of you would challenge a legislator to do, if these work, then prove it. Data. It's very simple. Somebody taught me once something, if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. So let's measure it. Every place that there's a camera, every year, let's do 3 simple things. Number 1, the community has to report the number of citations that are issued at that corner and what those citations are for and what time of the day they're issued. Number 2, at each of those intersections, they have to report the number of accidents that take place in them and what happened in terms of the accident. And third, they have to turn all of this data over to IDOT and ultimately to some place like the Northwestern Center on traffic to have it analyzed, to figure out what was happening before and what's happening now. It's a very simple proposal. If, in fact, they do what you claim, then the data ought to demonstrate that. If the data doesn't demonstrate that, then, in fact, then at some point you ought to have a threshold where people have to take down the cameras.
You can't also trust the data necessarily of the municipality because in August, the Tribune did a story that compared IDOT crash information at intersections, at red light intersections, and the city's data, and magically the data wasn't comparable, and the city's data was showing a much more positive outlook on their results than what IDOT data was showing. In fact, basically, they showed IDOT data seemed to demonstrate that there was no difference between the red light camera intersections, before red light camera intersections and after the red light cameras went in, where the CDOT information showed, happy days, everything's, we're solving this problem.
Isn't that an argument for including IDOT in it, though?
Right, it is.
Yeah.
It is. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You have to have somebody at least somewhat independent.
So ultimately, what this is, it appears to be a hidden tax. It's a way to tax the citizens, and I very much agree that citizens have to get involved in this and pressure their legislatures and change that. And then I just want to finish by saying thanks a lot to the panel. Excellent discussion, and I definitely learned a lot about this subject, and I appreciate.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.